I think we make a mistake without even realizing it. When we talk about evolution, we usually think about the past. We think about how life got here, how species changed over time, and how humans eventually emerged. But lately, I've been wondering if we're looking at evolution from the wrong direction. Because if evolution produced intelligent life once, what exactly stopped the process there? What if intelligence wasn't the end of the story? What if it was the beginning of something else? For a long time, I've had a thought that keeps coming back to me whenever I read about evolution, astronomy, or really anything that deals with the history of the universe. Humans seem to have a very strange relationship with nature. Scientifically, we know exactly where we came from. We know the Earth isn't the center of anything. We know our species emerged through evolution, just like every other organism on this planet. We know the atoms in our bodies were forged inside stars billions of years ago. In other words, we know we're part of nature, and yet we rarely act like we believe it. Without even thinking about it, we tend to split the world into two categories. On one side, there's nature. Forests, mountains, oceans, animals. On the other side, there's humanity. Cities, computers, factories, satellites. Somewhere along the way, we drew an invisible line between the two. The problem is that the line doesn't really make sense. If a bird builds a nest, we call it natural. If a beaver builds a dam, we call it natural. But if humans build a bridge, a city, or a computer, we suddenly place those things into a completely different category. I've never understood why. Humans didn't appear outside nature. We are products of the exact same evolutionary process that produced every other species on Earth. Every thought you've ever had, every invention we've ever created, emerged from a brain that itself emerged through evolution. So why would the products of that process be considered separate from the process itself? The universe produced stars. Stars produced the elements. Those elements formed planets. On at least one of those planets, chemistry became biology. Biology became evolution. Evolution produced intelligent brains. And those brains built computers. Seen from that perspective, technology doesn't look like an interruption of nature. It looks like the latest chapter of it. And once I started looking at technology that way, a much more interesting question appeared. Not where technology comes from, but why evolution produced it in the first place. The more I thought about it, the stranger technology became. Humans didn't step outside evolution. We emerged from it. Every trait that made technology possible was shaped by the same process that shaped everything else in nature. Our intelligence, our ability to cooperate, our capacity for abstract thought, our curiosity, even our tendency to explore things that have no immediate survival value. None of these abilities appeared independently. Evolution built them. And if evolution built the brain, then in a very real sense, it also built what the brain eventually created. That's why I've started to think that technology isn't really an invention. It's a consequence. Not because evolution was trying to create computers. Evolution doesn't plan ahead, and it doesn't have goals. But once a species becomes intelligent enough to understand its environment, curious enough to investigate it, and capable enough to share knowledge across generations, technology seems to appear almost automatically. In fact, if you rewind history far enough, the first computer doesn't really begin with silicon. It begins when evolution starts producing the traits that make a computer possible in the first place. And this is where things get interesting. The basic idea is that different intelligent civilizations could eventually arrive at similar technologies completely independently of one another. Not because they're communicating, and not because they're following the same cultural path, but because they're all constrained by the same laws of physics. Any civilization that wants to store information has to solve the same problem. Any civilization that wants to generate energy has to solve the same problem. Any civilization that wants to communicate across distance or explore space faces the same limitations. The details might differ, but the destination could end up looking surprisingly similar. And if that's true, then technology starts looking less like a human invention and more like something evolution naturally discovers. Of course, we don't know if that's actually the case. Maybe intelligent life is so rare that it only happened once. Maybe Earth is the only place where evolution ever produced a species capable of building technology. But if intelligence emerges elsewhere, it's hard not to wonder whether the same chain reaction would unfold again. Because once evolution produces a species capable of asking questions about the world around it, something changes. Curiosity begins generating knowledge. Knowledge begins generating tools, and over time, those tools become technology. At that point, technology no longer looks like a historical accident. It starts looking like a natural consequence of what evolution does when given enough time. And if that's true, then perhaps the most important question isn't why humans build technology. It's whether evolution itself tends to build technology whenever the conditions allow it. Because if that's the case, then what happened on Earth may not be unique at all. It may simply be what evolution does. Of course, there's a problem with everything I've said so far. We only have one example: Earth. Every conclusion we've drawn about life, intelligence, and technology comes from a sample size of one. We have no second Earth to compare ourselves to, no second evolutionary history, no way of knowing whether what happened here is common, rare, or completely unique. And that matters. Because if life only exists on Earth, then this entire discussion may be meaningless. Technology would simply be a local phenomenon, a strange sequence of events that happened once in an otherwise silent universe, a cosmic accident. But if life exists elsewhere, then the implications become much harder to ignore, because at that point, we're no longer talking about humanity. We're talking about a pattern. And if technology really is something evolution naturally discovers, then every living world becomes a kind of experiment. Different starting conditions, different environments, different evolutionary paths, yet potentially arriving at the same destination. The obvious question is why? Why would evolution repeatedly move in that direction? The honest answer is that nobody knows. But there is one thing that stands out. Every piece of technology we've ever created can ultimately be traced back to curiosity. Curiosity is what drives exploration. Exploration generates knowledge. Knowledge generates technology. And technology expands the range of exploration even further. And once it begins, it becomes incredibly difficult to stop. What's interesting is that this process eventually starts producing things that are better explorers than we are. Humans weren't the first representatives of Earth to arrive on Mars. Machines were. They don't need oxygen. They don't need food. They don't care about radiation, isolation, or the psychological strain of spending years inside a spacecraft. In many ways, they're simply better optimized for exploring space than we are. And that's a strange thought. Because if technology is a consequence of evolution, then evolution may have already started handing the process over. For billions of years, biology did the exploring. Then biology created intelligence. Intelligence created technology, capable of going places their creators couldn't. If the same pattern unfolds elsewhere, then perhaps this is how exploration spreads throughout the universe. Maybe Earth is unique. Maybe life happened once and technology happened once. But if life emerges elsewhere, then a very strange possibility appears. Maybe the story of the universe isn't just the story of matter organizing itself into life. Maybe it's the story of life organizing itself into technology that expands across the universe. And if that's true, then computers, satellites, probes, and artificial intelligence aren't separate from nature at all. They're simply the latest thing evolution has discovered. The question is whether it will discover them again.